So last year I created this realistic portrait drawing guide, and I walked you through the entire process of a drawing step by step, covering lots of different techniques and methods. And if you've been around here for a while, you'll know that I like to cover lots of different aspects surrounding drawing on this channel, one of them being realistic drawing, which is a style and way of working that I know a lot of you are interested in as well. So I think it's about time that I do another one of these complete step by step realistic portrait tutorial guides, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so first of all we need something to draw. So this is the image we're going to be using throughout this series for a few reasons. One of them being that the image is at a high resolution, meaning I can zoom in and see all of the detail without the image being blurred or distorted in any way. It's probably a good idea to get a reference image that is of high quality. If you want to find out how to find these high resolution images online, then here's a quick tip. So when you are searching for an image on Google, head over to where it says Tools, then select this drop down menu which says Size, scroll down to Larger Than, choose a suitable size, and I recommend the largest one because that will give you images which are at a high resolution at that size or higher. Another reason why I'm using this image is because there's a lot of stuff going on right now in this image that I can dedicate episodes to. For instance, the hair, we can do a video on hair texture, skin texture, there's some clothing, there's a blurred background, so we can do a video on how to create that kind of effect. So it will give us the opportunity to explore all of these techniques and ways of working, which you can then learn and apply to when you create other portraits or other drawings. So to get started in this first episode, I'm going to run you through the equipment that I'll be using. I'll also show you how to create a grid digitally, meaning you don't have to print the image out. In previous videos, and I think in the last guide that I did, I showed you how to create the grid, but we had the reference image printed out on paper. You don't need to do that with this one. We're going to be working from the screen, the computer screen, meaning that we can actually zoom in using the software and we'll be able to work from the reference that way. It's probably a lot more convenient, and then once we've got the drawing all gridded out, we'll start outlining the subject and getting it ready for when we start rendering in detail in future episodes. So yeah, let's get into it. So let's take a look at the equipment that I'll be using. First up is this mechanical pencil. This is the Uniball Crew Toga, and I've been drawing with this for years. I used some 2B lead with this, and I found that that's a good grade to use as it lets you achieve a range of shades from light to dark. To be able to create those much darker shades in our portrait, I'll be using a softer pencil grade like this 8B. This is also a pencil extender, by the way, which isn't essential at all. I'm just using it because the pencils get short and this allows you to get more use out of them. Next up is the Tombow Mono Zero eraser, which is probably one of the most useful pieces of equipment, especially for what we are going to be doing. Not only will this allow you to be really accurate when you erase areas of the drawing, but it will also help you produce various textures as it can be good for highlights. I'll be using a ruler to create the grid on paper, and for the paper I'm using some A4 Bristol board. This provides a good quality drawing surface to work on. I've linked all of this equipment in the description below. So that is pretty much all of the equipment that I'll be using throughout this series, and now it's time to put pencil to paper and start creating a grid. So currently I'm in Photoshop and I have my reference image on an A4 sheet. I'm going to leave it at this size instead of scaling up to the edge of the paper because I think this border looks quite good. So now let's start putting in a grid, and I suppose you can do this manually, but you can do what I did and just download a grid online and then just crop and resize it so it fits the paper. Here is the grid which I downloaded, and at the minute this is way too big. So I'm quickly going to adjust this, and I'm going to make the grid be 11 units high and 8 wide. That is probably a good size for the grid. You can make it smaller or bigger if you wish, but it's up to you. Also, the grid method isn't necessary if you're comfortable drawing in the outlines and judging the proportions by eye. That's a bit more advanced though, and so if you are a beginner, this will help you out. Anyways, we have the grid and now we need to resize it and put it in position. Once you are happy with how this grid looks, you can come over here to the line tool and draw out a line alongside one of the units of the grid to be able to see the size. For this grid, it's about 26mm squared. Also pay attention to where the center of the grid is on the page because it will help us when we draw this out on paper. Also, if you are struggling to see the grid, then feel free to change the color of it to something more visible. You can also lower the opacity opacity so that you can see through it. So because we are working with the reference on screen, we can zoom in and see all of the detail. You could also print this out if you think that having a physical copy will help you. Now it's time to recreate the exact same grid on paper. To do this, I normally start by finding the center of the paper and creating a dividing line. I know that I've divided this into 8 units and that each unit is around 26mm, and so I can easily mark out these divisions and create the vertical lines. I do the same for the horizontal lines, making sure that each unit is at the correct size. I suppose another way to do all of this would be to draw the grid out on paper first, then scan that into the computer and lay that over onto your image as well. It's whatever you find best. Now your grid might be different to mine slightly, so make sure you measure the units of the grid on the software that you used and compare it often to make sure it looks okay. Okay, so we have the grid drawn out on paper, which is identical to the one we created digitally, and we can start taking advantage of this, outlining some key features and making sure the proportions are as accurate as possible. So now it's time for perhaps the most challenging part of the drawing tutorial, because we need to start using this grid to outline the position of some facial features. I don't normally go into too much detail in this outlining stage. Instead, I just want to get an accurate point for where the eyes will be, things like the nose as well, and the mouth. All of these things will have to be in the correct place, otherwise it won't look like the subject we are drawing. You still have to estimate the exact position of some of these, but the grid does make that easier because you can focus in on one individual unit. Try and look at where parts of the image cross the grid, like this eye here where you can see that it crosses around the halfway point. It's really important to get accurate proportions, so that's why I get this out of the way at an early stage. Because we are going to be spending a lot of time rendering this, we want to make sure that what we are rendering looks correct. You might not be able to see my pencil lines here as I'm doing this lightly, but once you are happy with the outline you have created, step back and compare it with the reference image again on screen, and then you are all set to start rendering this portrait realistically. But that's pretty much everything we need to do to get this started, and once you have something like this, you'll be more confident when working on the drawing. I think I'm going to take a different approach when I render this, but I'll explain that in the next one. So there we go everybody, this has been part 1 of this new realistic portrait drawing guide. I'll be documenting the whole process, creating tutorials along the way so you can follow along, and if you want to see more and you enjoyed this video then please give it a like, subscribe with the notifications on to stay up to date, and if you want to check out the Patreon page, I'll leave a link in the description. But that's pretty much everything. Thank you for watching, I'll see you in the next one.